All right, hello, everyone. We are live here in the Christa Quilts Facebook group, and I am Christa Watson of Christa Quilts, and that sure is saying my name a long time, a lot of times. Okay, I have a funny little story to tell you guys. I always like to kind of tell you stories, what's happening as everybody kind of jumps on. So my name is Christa, and it's spelled Christa. But because I know a lot of people spell my name wrong, I actually own a lot of domain names that are spelled incorrectly. So I have Krista with a K, Krista with a CR, whatever. And so every now and then I will get somebody that will email me. And my email address, by the way, if you guys ever need to email me about anything, it's my name, Krista, at christaquilts.com because my name is in the business. So Krista at christaquilts.com if you guys ever need to email me. So every now and then I will get an email, Krista at christaquilts.com, and they'll write, Dear Krista, and they'll spell my name wrong. Even though they'll get the email address right, they'll get my name wrong. So anyway, not a big deal. I just like to just kind of think that's kind of funny. But anyway, welcome. You guys can jump on, just say hi, tell me what it's like. It is Tuesday, December 7th. I am coming to you from my studio live in Las Vegas. And I am sad to report it finally got cold, you guys. We have lived in the desert here forever. Many of you know, last year around this time, I actually built a pool and I've been enjoying it for a year now. We've been heating it and we finally had to turn the pool off. We finally had to stop heating it because today, December 7th, is the day that it finally started getting cold, which, that means 65 degrees. If it's below 70, it's cold here in the desert. So, anyway, it's officially fall. Maybe we'll get winter. Summer is officially over on December 7th here in Las Vegas. But anyway, welcome. I'm excited to see you guys. Oh, good. Michelle says hello from Scrappy Queen, working while listening. That's awesome. We're glad to have you guys here. For those of you that are new joining me, so this is my live that I do every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific in my Facebook group. I will post the replay later in my Facebook group and also on YouTube. So if you miss it or you want to come back and watch it or join the chat later, that's totally fine. If you have any questions, put them in the box. I will answer them live on the air. And if you have questions later and you watch the replay, I monitor that and I will go back later and I will answer any questions you have. This weekly chat, I pitch a topic each week that we discuss, but I want it to be really interactive. I want it to be my chance to hang out with you guys for about half hour, 45 minutes, just to really have a fun little chat, whether you listen live or later on. Yeah, my hair's getting really long. Oh, happy Tuesday, Lisa. So I've mentioned this a couple times. My hair, I normally don't grow it this long, but I have not cut it since the pandemic. So almost 2 years now, I've let it grow. And what I'm doing is once in my life, probably about 10 years ago, I grew it really long. I cut it off and I donated it so that they could make wigs for cancer patients. So I thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do during the pandemic. I am literally going to grow out my hair until I have a series of live events that I'm doing until I'm traveling regularly, and then I'll cut it off. And so I'm hoping, I know you have to have at least 10 inches. So I know I have probably a good 10 or 12 inches, and I'll probably chop it this short, but I want to let it keep growing while it's still brown before the grays take over. I don't dye my hair, but I'm definitely getting some gray. So while it's nice and brown, I'm going to grow it out as long as I can. I will chop it off. I will donate it so they can make wigs. And so because I've kind of been home a lot, I haven't had to do that yet. Probably next spring when spring quilt market comes around is probably when I'll cut it. So anyway, ooh, maybe we could do a bet like how long is my hair? How, how long will it have been in between haircuts so we could have a good time with that. But yes, I'm growing it out on purpose. I'm going to cut it off. I'm a little, wanting to go maybe like super short and I could donate all of that, but that might be a little too much. So maybe like a nice bob I could do and then I could still donate, good 10 to 12 inches. So we'll see. But that's the story on the hair. So thank you for noticing. Hi, Sharon. Nice to see you. Oh, looking forward. You ordered one of my books. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. So today's topic, now that we're kind of done with the intro chit chat, today's topic is going to be talking about pattern play. I am a fabric designer, a pattern designer, a quilter. I do all the things. And so I like to give you guys a peek behind the curtain into my processes, give you guys a chance to ask me all sorts of questions. So Today's topic. First of all, I use Electric Quilt software to design. People say, where do you get your inspiration? What software do you use to design? And that's what I use. I have used it. I started quilting in 1994. I started designing my first quilts maybe about 1995, 1996. And I think back then they were on version 4 of Electric Quilt. Now they're already up to version 8. Once I started traveling and teaching, I actually hooked up with the owners of Electric Quilt and everybody that runs the company, and I've taught for them. I've met the owners. Another fun story. So when they first started doing this thing called EQ Academy that they do at their headquarters every year, they had me come in and I actually taught a couple classes on how to use EQ8. I decided after teaching those and having so much fun meeting people, I do not like to teach EQ8. So I know that I love teaching machine quilting. I love teaching piecing. I'll talk to you about everything. What I realized is I'm very good at what I do with quilting. People say I'm a good teacher. I enjoy teaching. However, I'm not good with technology. And so what I realized, the folks at Electric Quilt were fabulous. They had like a tech person with me in the room. I also taught Electric Quilt at QuiltCon a couple times. I've been invited to teach it at like national shows like Road to California and all that. But what I realized is I'm very much, I think on the fly and I adjust my class and I talk a million miles a minute. And the issue with teaching EQ8 live, who knows, I didn't think I would go into this topic, but what the hey, it's live, that's what we do. I love the software. I design all my quilts in Electric Quilt. However, as a teacher, I didn't feel like I could do as good of a job because I'd be up there demoing and we'd have like a PowerPoint presentation and I would be talking about the software. And then students in the class wouldn't know, like they wouldn't know where their file is, and I am not computer savvy enough to help them find it. Does that make sense? So like if they'd say, oh, I saved this on my computer somewhere, it's hard for me technology wise to understand how to help them find it. So like I could do a demo and people could watch me through it, but it's hard to interact and ask questions and give examples on the fly because of the technology, not the software, but me being computer, I don't want to say I'm computer illiterate. I know as much as I need to know. Anyway, so all that song and dance is to say, no, I don't teach EQ. If people ask me questions, I refer them to their customer service. I know the program and I can use the program, but I'm not comfortable teaching the program. That's what I'm trying to say. Kind of weird, right? Because just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're a good teacher. I'm good at teaching machine quilting. I'm good at teaching other things. I'm not good at teaching Electric Quilt. So I refer people to them. However, saying that, and I didn't mean for this to be a big plug, I'm actually one of the ambassadors for Electric Quilt. Pretty much if there's a product that I use, I like to be an ambassador, whether they invite me to or I go to them and I say, hey, I want to be an ambassador because I want to be an ambassador for the quilting industry. And so if it's really fun and I like a project, or a product. So anyway, with Electric Quilt, they actually do offer teaching camps every year at their headquarters. So I highly recommend that if you want to learn, go there in person if you can. How I learned Electric Quilt, literally, I went through the manual. I tried out the examples, and now whenever I'm trying to do something specific, like let's say I'm trying to put a block on point, if I don't know how to do that, I will Google, like I'll just get there on Google, ask Dr. Google, and I'll say, how do I put a block on point in Electric Quilt? How do I increase my block size in Electric Quilt? How do I import fabric swatches? Pretty much anything and everything you'd want to know. There's a tutorial, there's a blog, there's a class, it's out there. So people get a little bit intimidated by that software, Electric Quilt, but it is the best for designing quilts. Now, I'll share one more quick story, then I'll go on to other stuff. This is why these last long, because I always think of all these stories. So I met the owners, Penny and Dean. They're amazing, amazing people, really altruistic, very kind, very generous people. I don't know how much they're involved in the day to day anymore because they've got like kind of the next generation really running the show. It's a very well run company. And I suggested to them, I said, what I would really love, I talked to them and I talked to their managers, I would love to have a design software, EQ, Electric Quilt for fabric designers or for pattern designers. And all I can say, it's on the back burner. It's on the back burner. That was a couple of 4, 3, 4, 5 years ago when I actually met them and taught at their headquarters. and it's on their to-do list, but they've got other, other things in front of it. Like they just came out with EQ8 last year, maybe, I don't know. The newer version, on their list is to create it natively for Macintosh. That's on their to-do list. But anyway, that's kind of my wish list, is that they would have the program where you can take everything in there and you can actually write a pattern in the program. Most pattern designers, we can take the images from EQ8 and we can import them into a document like Illustrator or all kinds of different design software programs. But if you're not really savvy with that, it's kind of hard. And so that's my recommendation for them. I would love for them to come up with an EQ version for designers where you could actually write a pattern in the program. So anyway, but love the folks. Can't say enough good about them. If you get the software, I highly recommend it. And yes, just to recap, Electric Quilt, I just, every single quilt, even the modern ones, even the funkies, every single quilt that I have made since 1995 has been designed by me in Electric Quilt software. I know somebody had a question about, well, how do you figure out the math? The nice thing is Electric Quilt does it for you. And then what I do is I go in there and I double check it. So let me kind of go into that for just a quick second before I get more into pattern design. I have on my blog at christaquilts.com, I have a little tutorial that I call Quilty Math that goes into a bunch of different calculations. But in general, when I became a pattern designer, it was hard for me to say, why would somebody like buy a very easy pattern of just squares if they could just figure it out themselves? And then someone said, well, not everybody likes to do the math. But let's just use a very simple example of squares. When you're trying to figure out, how do I figure out how much fabric I need? Let's say you are cutting out a quilt that is 6 rows across and 7 rows down, and it's just squares. Like you can make it from a charm pack. So it's 6 squares across and 7 squares down. That would be 42 squares, right? 6 times 7 is 42. And then using the charm pack as an idea, well, what if you wanted to cut those squares 5 inches? They'd shrink up to 4.5, or maybe you cut them 5.5 and they shrink down to 5, whatever it is. Let's just say you want to cut out a 5-inch square because you want to do 5-inch squares across and 5-inch squares down, which, like I said, is a charm pack, but that's easy. So you take your length of fabric or your width of fabric, which is 42 inches. Now, here's a little secret. When designers design, they're thinking about the 42-inch wide fabric. Here's a little secret. When designers design, they're thinking about the 42-inch wide fabric. What if you, as a fabric consumer, buy your 42-inch wide fabric and you cut off the selvages and you pre-wash it and you trim off the ends? You may not have 42 inches of usable fabric by the time you're ready to start your quilt. So what I always say, smart designers do not calculate math based on 42 inches. They round down. I personally design all of my fabrics or all of my patterns so that they can be cut from a strip that has 40 inches. Now, if it's less than 40, you're going to run into issues. So let's take our idea of a square that's cut out 5 inches and you have a 40-inch strip of fabric. Well, if you just take your fabric, 40 inches, and you divide that by your 5-inch square that you want to cut, 40 divided by 5 is 8. So that would tell you you can get 8 squares out of one 40-inch strip of fabric. So then if you could say, well, I'm making a quilt that's 6 blocks down and 7 or 6 by 7, so that's 42, and I can get 8 out of one strip of fabric, then you'd need to say, okay, well, how many strips of fabric do I need to get 42? Well, then you do your math. Okay, 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 5 is 40. Oh, okay, if I cut out 5 strips of fabric at 5-inch wide, that's going to give me 40 squares. So then I just need to cut out one more, right? So then I would cut out 9. So 5, let's see, I'm thinking on the fly. So let's see, if I were to say I had 8 squares per 5-inch strip and I need 42, would need to cut out 6 strips, okay? Because I can get 5 per strip. 5 times, no, I can get 8 per strip. I get 8 per strip. 8 times 6 is 48, and that would give me enough. Okay, I know that might be a brain burner. Literally, if that totally makes sense to you, maybe you want to be a pattern designer because that's all it is. So every quilt I'm figuring out, I'm thinking it, how many pieces can I get out of a 40-inch strip? If it's a 12-inch piece, well, maybe I can only get 3 because 3 times 12 is 36 and I have a 40-inch. You'll see when I design stuff, I try to design things so that they work nicely into a 40-inch strip. So maybe I wouldn't do a 12-inch block because that 12 times 3 is 36. That's an odd measurement. Maybe I would do a 10-inch I would do it based on 10 inches because 10 times 4 is 40, and that's my 40 inch. Here's the issue. When you do 10 and a half inches, well, then you need more than 40 because of your seam allowance. So maybe I would do a 9 inch block and not meaning a 9 inch block would be 9.5 inches unfinished. A 10 inch block would be 10.5 inches. So I won't get too crazy into there. I just want to give you an overview of how I think about things when I'm designing, when I'm using my EQ8. Okay. Have I thoroughly lost you guys? Hopefully not. Like I said, if you have more questions, feel free. So pattern play. First, I wanted to kind of walk you guys through where some of my inspiration comes from. In a nutshell, I think about ideas. So let me start with this quilt behind me. This is my Modern Logs pattern, and I have made this one several times. I have a bunch of my patterns kind of scattered around my little work area here, so I'm going to kind of talk to you guys about them. So Modern Logs, okay, so the big one behind me, that was made from my Good Vibes fabric. If you look very closely up there, that's the newest one I just made out of my Black, White, and Bright collection. So here's my Modern Logs. So where did this inspiration come from? It came from me wanting to make a modern version of a log cabin quilt. So a lot of times when I have an idea, sometimes I'll put more than one idea in the same pattern. If the idea is different enough, I will create two separate patterns. So that's what I actually did for Modern Logs. So let me walk you through that. The first version of my Modern Logs design, I actually made way back in 2013, and I made it as a class sample. Then over the years, I kind of refined the design, and then I re-released the pattern last year when my Good Vibes fabric came out. So let me talk you through the design of this Modern Logs, and then I'll back in and kind of show you where else I've gone. I wanted to make a modern version of a traditional design. Well, a traditional log cabin starts with a square in the middle, and then you build logs all the way around it. Okay. Well, so one different way that I designed this quilt is I thought, you know what? Rather than making it traditional where every single log is the same size and you have half light and you have half dark, my first iteration of it actually was published in my book, Machine Quilting with Style. So I came up with the idea in 2013. I played around with some patterns. This book came out in 2015. And one version of it, let me show you the big picture of it, looks like this. But it's a completely different pattern than the one behind me. They're both Modern Logs type quilts, but they're different. So this version right here in the book, I took the traditional idea of the light and dark. Half of the block is light, half of the block is dark, but I cut the strips wonky. And of course, they're different sizes within the strips, and that's really fun. Here's kind of a close-up where you can see the really yummy quilting. So for my book, what I did is I kept the traditional layout in that half of the design was dark and half of the design was light, and I put it in a really kind of fun setting. Anybody that's ever made a log cabin knows that you can do all kinds of settings. You can do barn raising, you can do light and dark, sunshine and shadows. And so I did kind of a fun offset, much more modern design, which by the way, so this book, Machine Quilting with Style, I know many of you have it. It's out of print now. It came out in 2015. I'm down to my last case, my last box of books. So it's about 36 or less. Maybe I have about 30 of these left. I'll sign them for you. They're actually on sale as of today, December 7th, but I only have a few left. So if you want, you can get this book and I'll sign it for you. If you're seeing this like far out in the future and they're gone, I know that the publisher, Martingale, still will be selling the PDF download. But if you want the print copy of this, I only have a few of them left. So that's one version, one way to do Modern Logs or log cabin is to do the light dark. Well, I wanted to release it as its own independent pattern separate from the book because the math is different. Even though it's a similar idea in this book with my Modern Logs, the block size here is completely different than the block size behind me. And so then the next variation I did is rather than do the half light and half dark diagonally, if you look closely, this is still half light, half dark, but it's half light, half dark each time you go around the block. So you either start with a light square and then do a dark strip around it, or you start with a dark square and do a light strip around it. So it's still being sewn together log cabin style, but it's a different arrangements. So in both patterns, in the Modern Logs version and in the version called Ripples from my book, totally different quilts, but they're both based on a modernized version of a log cabin with kind of irregular strips. The one in the book is the more traditional layout with the half light, half dark diagonally. The pattern itself is a completely different layout where you start around the center and move around. It's kind of similar to like the courthouse steps design of a log cabin. If you've never seen that, you can they look it up. So that's one way that I take an idea, a log cabin, and I make it my own. Now, did I invent the log cabin? Absolutely not. Did I invent the idea of sewing wonky strips around a log cabin? Absolutely not. What I did that made it different from everyone else is how I thought about the light dark, how I did the arrangements, how I cut my strips, how I put it together, and the instructions that I include in the pattern. So that's kind of what makes it mine, where it's a public domain idea of a log cabin, but I kind of changed it up and played around with it. So that's one way that I do pattern design is I'll take a traditional block idea and then I'll play around with it. Another way I will change up is I will just take a very simple design. Again, somebody else could come up with this, but I will figure out the math and cut it, and I will try it out in a couple different ways. So with that one, you guys might have seen my terrace tiles pattern. I actually made this quilt 3 times. I made it once right here in these pretty blues and teals, and then I made it 2 more times in a kind of a pinky color. This is reversed on me, so I have to like point to it. A pink color and then kind of a blue-green color. I have one of them close to me, so I'll kind of show you that. Here's this one in this colors. This is a very simple pattern. It is literally my easiest quilt that you can make. And all it is, it's kind of like a variation on a, I'm getting some glare here. It's kind of like a variation on like a rail fence. So all it is it's just, let's see, let's get kind of close in here. All it is, all it is just 2 rectangles. Can you see that? 2 rectangles with a little strip in between. So on a rail fence, you can do 3 rectangles or you can do 4 rectangles, and you normally like do a fence like horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical. I kind of did that idea with the stacking, but I did 2 wider pieces and then a narrower piece. So very simple. Here, I'll show you more on here. So anyway, very simple to do this block. And then again, I made it in different colors. And each version of the quilt, I actually machine quilted it with a different design, which we're going to talk a little bit more about machine quilting next week. So I'll get into that. But anyway, what's really fun about this is with this quilt, this was made from my gridwork fabric collection, and I still have plenty of fat quarter bundles. Let me show you these. These are super cute. This is kind of that breeze colorway. And then this is kind of that like modern-y citron colorway. So I actually have kits that I put together to make this in either one of the colorways. And one thought I had is how fun would it be if I remade that quilt using both of them and like mixing them up together. So taking a very simple design like a rail fence, very simple elements, and then just changing the size. So again, if I had made this quilt and all of the strips were the same size, then I would get more of a rail fence design. But because I had 2 big rectangles and then a skinny rectangle right in the middle, then it just changes up the design. So like I said, it's very simple to be a pattern designer. You just take an idea and you start sketching either in EQ or on maybe graph paper, and then you come up with these different ideas. So that's kind of a simple way to do it. All right, just check in. Let me just check in on your questions here. Everybody's kind of saying hi, coming in, where you're from. Oh, good, talking about the math. Jane wants to know, how fast does it take to come up to speed? Are there any other books to go with it? Oh, she's talking about Electric Quilt. Yes, what I would say, Jane, give yourself an independent study class. Give yourself 6 to 8 weeks and tell yourself you're going to practice 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week. This is a rule of thumb for anything you want to learn, whether it's machine quilting or piecing or hand sewing or electric quilt design software. 6 to 8 weeks, 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week. You machine quilt 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. You play around with electric quilt software 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 6 to 8 weeks. You will be an expert. That's like a mini class. If you go to their website, they have lots of books that you can buy. There's other designers that have how to learn EQ. The main thing, just like with machine quilting and just like anything else, you're not going to be an expert in 5 minutes. You're not going to sit down, open up the software, and like design your best of show quilt. Just like you're not going to sit down at your new sewing machine, start stitching, and then make your best in show quilt, right? It's going to take time to learn it. But if you stick with it, the learning curve is really worth it in the end. So good. I'm glad that you asked about that. Okay. So another idea, again, I take an idea. What can I do with? And I was thinking one day, what can I do? This is just a jelly roll strip of one of my fabrics. I was kind of lying around using it as like a bookmark. And I thought, what can I do to make a modern jelly roll quilt? So I have a couple of ideas. One idea, actually 2 ideas, are from my book, Piece and Quilt with Pre-Cuts. This is my other book that's out of print now, that I only have a few, maybe a dozen or two copies of this one. This is all, tells you how to machine quilt, but it also gives you patterns that you can make from pre-cuts. So I actually have two patterns in this book that came from the same idea, but you wouldn't know that they're related. So many of you guys have seen this first one. Let me show you the picture of it. This one is called Dot and Dash. Okay, sorry about the glare there. I'm doing very low tech on these because every time I try to do a high tech, the software doesn't work, or like when I download it, the audio is off. So I'm just doing very low tech, and that's why I'm doing it this way. Anyway, so this one is called Dot and Dash. Okay, and that's just made from jelly rolls. So the idea was, what if I take a jelly roll strip and I just cut it at certain like random intervals? What happens? So with this one, going back to Dot and Dash, where'd it go? I was using this strip as a like a bookmark. Okay, with Dot and Dash, I took that parameter a little bit further, and I said, okay, I'm going to take that jelly roll strip, but instead of cutting it at random intervals, I'm going to cut rectangles and squares. Now the book is going to tell you exactly how many strips and how big to cut your rectangles and how big to cut your squares. So this was like rectangles and squares in a pattern. That was the only parameter I gave myself. And so I played around in Electric Quilt, and I probably came up with 5 to 10 different versions of that design, and that's the one I settled on. So that was answering one question. What can I do if I take a jelly roll strip and I cut it randomly into rectangles and squares? What can I get? The other idea I came up with was even more random. It's this quilt called Frequency. And so again, 2.5 inch strips. But this one was completely random. This was like, okay, instead of cutting rectangles and squares, what if every strip is completely random? And not only am I using dark strips, I have to use light strips too. So I sat down and I came up with the design. That's my first step. The next step is to come up and figure out, well, how do I cut that so that it doesn't take more than one jelly roll? Or how do I cut that or design that so that it takes exactly half of a jelly roll? This one I believe takes like one full jelly roll. If you look close, half of it is light and half of it is dark. I didn't want it to take, so it takes like 20 strips of light and 20 strips of dark. I do that a lot in my patterns, because what a bummer it would be if I designed a quilt and you needed like 21 strips and you didn't have that. So I try to make the math work out, and that was the result here, this one. Then I thought, okay, so this came out in the book. Then when I had fabric, I remade it. And I actually made a fun little quilt in collaboration with Leah Day. Leah said, hey, make a quilt for me and I'll quilt it for you. And so I took that and I did Frequency, and I made this out of my very first Modern Marks. And instead of cutting the strips 2.5 inches, I cut them 1.5 inches, because these were a bunch of leftovers from strike offs from my first fabric line. Okay, fun fact coming up here. So strike offs are when you get like the sample fabric back. There's a fabric in here, I'm going to find it and point it out to you, that did not make it into the fabric collection. This right here, for any of you that have Modern Marks, my very first line, you do not have this fabric. That one right there. Whoops, I got to point to it. You do not have that fabric, because on this strike off piece, this fabric, I had to take it out of the line because it did not print well. It is a very yellow on teal fabric, and it didn't print well. And so what we ended up doing is, I think we ended up changing it to just be a tone on tone. So you will have a similar, go look in your little bundle or your jelly roll bundle, for those of you that have Modern Marks way back in 2017, and you do not have that fabric. So anyway, that's kind of fun. So anyway, Leah Day took it, and you can see on the back, she did a lot of the machine quilting, and then I went back and added more quilting. This is the only quilt that I have in my possession that somebody else has stitched on. Every other quilt, I've done them myself, because I'm just anal that way. But it's a fun little keepsake that we worked on that together. So anyway, what was my point? Oh, my point was, take an idea, take a jelly roll strip, cut it up into random shapes, and then that's how I came up with that pattern. Another one, I'll just show you the pattern here, Blooming Wallflowers. This is our quilt along that we're starting in January. I'm filming right now. This came out of, what designs can I make out of this very simple triangle in a square shape? And so I literally sat there and I played around and came up with like 20 different versions. Anytime you see a quilt design from me using this triangle in a square shape, it started from this idea. Blooming Wallflowers is just one of them. I have more of them coming up in the future. But that's simple. That's like taking a half square triangle or a circle and saying, what can I make with a circle? What can I make with a half square triangle? Another one that I did, going back to the jelly rolls, is color weave. A lot of you guys have seen this. This came out of I actually took a picture of a mat that I had, a front door mat, like outside, and it had a really woven effect. I was like, ooh, that looks really cool. How can I play around with the math and make a quilt design? So that was how Color Weave came to be. And the secret with Color Weave is I had to design this. I designed it for a specific line of fabric, but it works well with others. Each colored strip, let's try to see that without the glare. Each colored strip calls for 2 strips of fabric, because a lot of my fabric designs have double strips. Like if you, if a fabric collection has 20 fabrics and you're buying a pre-cut that has 40 fabrics, well, each fabric is going to appear twice. So in this design, each fabric appears twice so that you can use 2 jelly roll strips. And so again, a modern version of that one. So that's Color Weave. Let's see. What else do I want to tell you? Oh, okay. Show you some more examples. That's the other question. Oh, good. Michelle's pulling fabrics for blooming wallflowers. Excellent. That's really, really cool. Now, one of my favorite shapes of all time is a half square triangle. Pretty much anytime you see half square triangles, like you can see them peeking out right there, that's my chevrons quilt pattern. I started off really organized when I set up for today, and then by the time I move everything around, it kind of goes all over the place. Anyway, that's my chevrons quilt. Here is a sample that I made when I was coming up with quilting designs. I always like to make a sample and do some really fun quilting on my chevron design. After I made this quilt, and I've made several different versions of it, I played around more with half square triangles, and so this design, this chevron design, morphed into my Modern X design, which I think some of you guys have seen. And this particular one, this little small sample, this is a mini where I actually made this using smaller squares than what it says in the pattern. So if you're trying to change things up, a really, really easy way is to take the math that it says in your quilt, in your pattern, and just shrink it down. So if it says, cut out a 4-inch square, then what you can do is you could say, well, what does the design look like if I cut out a 2-inch square instead of a 4-inch square? What if I cut out an 8-inch square instead of a 4-inch square? So these two guys, this is Charming Chevrons, and this is Modern X. They both came out of the half square triangle and the chevron shape and playing around with them. They're different enough that they're 2 completely different patterns, but they came from the same shape. A similar design that also came out of these guys was my geese in the garden. I have kind of the a bigger one here, I'll show you. However, this one is not made from half square triangles. A lot of you guys have seen this one right here in blue. And then I also have it in pink. I'll tell you how I came up with this idea. This was really fun. This one. Now, most of you guys know that because I design fabric, all the quilts I make, I try to make them to show off my fabrics. Well, with this one, if you can kind of see those triangles, they're cousin to this guy. But what I did not want to do, I did not want to have seams in my quilt. Let me kind of show you a close up. Because of the fabrics, because of this fabric right here, that could have been 2 half square triangles, but it's not. It's a diamond-like shape. It's not a diamond. A diamond is a symmetrical shape. This is not a diamond shape. It is an offset shape that is basically the shape that you get if you were to take 2 half square triangles and sew them together. 2 half square triangles sewn together and rotated is going to give you this kind of, I call it like a squished diamond shape. Oh my goodness, it took me forever to figure out the math for that. But basically what you do is you take your strip and you take your ruler, and I think it's maybe like a 45-degree angle, maybe a 30-degree, it's in the pattern. But anyway, so you offset your ruler to cut that shape. And so it's kind of a diamond, but because it's not a true diamond, it has a mirror image. So if you were to cut 2 of those shapes, and you had your strips folded together, you would have a mirror image. And so you have to be careful of that. So these are things I'm thinking of as a designer. Can I eliminate a seam and come up with a brand new shape? Is this shape a mirror image of itself? Do I need a left version of the image and a right version of the image? But all of those ideas came from the basic half square triangle. Trust me, I got plenty more half square triangle designs where that came from. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you about? I think that's the main patterns I have here, but I want to show you one more. I've mentioned this before. I have my bling pattern, which is actually what I just remade this with a completely different layout, and I talked about that before. But did you know that bling and interlinked are cousins of each other? If you look very, very closely, again, sorry about the glare, you can see this little square and these 2 little legs. That's the block. The big square and then the legs. And I called it bling because it kind of looks like a diamond ring, you know, like if that were like a modernized version of a diamond ring. And so when I was naming this quilt, I was trying to come up with all kinds of fun names. So that little square and the two little legs. I love that shape and I hadn't really seen it before. Here I kind of just threw the blocks and I tossed them around. And in the pattern itself, I actually came up with some more layouts that you could play around with. And then I actually made this one right here called the hashtag layout. And I actually have an update that I've added to this pattern that has a little bit more scrappy version of that. Whenever I point to something, by the way, my screen is reversed. So like this is my right hand, but when I'm looking at it on screen, it's showing me as my left. So my, I'm trying to touch this and I'm like, where's my finger? Where am I touching it? So anyway, back to this little shape, the bling shape with the two legs and the square. That shape, if you look very closely, that same shape, the square with the two little legs, appears in interlinked. Woo. But I have little feet on my legs, and I sewed all the blocks together. So unless you sat and studied this, you would not know that these both started off with the same shape. Again, you start off with a square, you can come up with a million ideas. You start off with a half square triangle or a chevron, you can come up with a million ideas. Same thing for any design, any shape. So if you see a shape that you really like a little, you know, like a little bling with a square and two legs, or a parallelogram, or a circle, or a tree shape, take that shape, sketch it out, add legs to it, add a top to it, add a bottom to it, and that's basically my design process. What if? I'm always asking myself, what if I came up with this? What if I rotated this to the left? What if I rotated this to the right? So anyway, in a nutshell, in 35 minutes, that's kind of my design process. Start with an idea, play around with it in Electric Quilt, rotate the shape, add little pieces onto the shape, extend the drawing and see what I can come up with. And the sky is like pretty much unlimited when it comes to these designs. So anyway, that's kind of my presentation for today. I don't really see any questions. I'll stick around for another minute. Next week, we are going to talk about quilting with variegated thread. This is my variegated thread collection right here. I know a lot of you guys have this. This is really fun, has lots of really cool threads in it. I will show you some examples of some of the examples that I have with me today, but I will go more in depth. Like that's a variegated thread, and I'll just talk about it in general, things to think about when quilting with variegated thread. So kind of a niche idea, but my idea with each of these is I want to talk to you for about half an hour, 45 minutes about little topics, and just if you guys have questions, think about my insight into my designing process. So anyway, yes, I'm very low tech. Those of you that are watching the replay later, feel free to add any questions that you want, either on Facebook or on YouTube, depending where you're watching this, and I will see those questions. And I want to wish you guys a very wonderful holiday season. We're prepping for Christmas around here. We've got all the kids home. It's really exciting. Sharon wants to know how much is on each roll of thread. For my variegated thread, it is this is more than I thought. Can you see that? 1,422 yards in each one. 12 large spools, 1,400 yards. I can quilt this quilt behind me. If I quilt a loose design, I can quilt the whole quilt on about one spool of thread. If it's a dense design, I'll get 2 spools of thread and I'll use one for the top and one for the bobbin. Or if I'm using, I'm already going into next week topic, guys, but it's okay. I'll say the same thing. But if I'm using, I'll show you a couple of these. Like if I wanted to use this pink variegated and I wasn't sure I had enough, then maybe I would use this for the bobbin. See how they're very similar in color? And so I would use one for the top, one for the bobbin. But what I wouldn't do, I wouldn't necessarily do like a black and white for the top and a pink for the bobbin, because then you're going to kind of see, if you don't have perfect tension, you'll see little pokies, little dots of color. So I always try to do things where something is a very similar color. Here's a couple that are similar also. They're 2 different colors, but they're similar. And so I'd use one for the top and one for the bobbin. One more example of these right here. So for next week, think about what questions you have about machine quilting in general. We'll talk about variegated threads. We'll talk about why I would do those instead of another one. But anyway, thank you guys for joining me today. And I'm just happy to talk and chat, and the time goes by really fast. So ta-ta for now. I just have to figure out how to stop it in my video. Bye-bye, guys.